Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show, News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM KFYO. Thank you for tuning in. Our first guest today, now this is going to be a really cool event coming up on Monday, June 24th, inside the Oval Office, an intimate evening with President George W. Bush's White House photographer, Eric Draper. This is being put on by the West Texas Photographers Organization and benefiting the Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep charity. And we'll give you more information about that charity here in just a little bit. Joining us on the phones right now is Eric Draper. Eric, good morning. How are you today?
Great.
I think this is going to be a fascinating evening. And this isn't just for those who are photographers. This is open to everybody. And tell folks a little bit about yourself and how you got to become the chief photographer for President George W. Bush.
Well, my background, I was a news photographer for many years, and I was a staff photographer with the Associated Press back in 1999 when they handed me an assignment to cover Texas Governor George W. Bush, who was about to announce he was running for president. So that's what I did for nearly over a year, covering the candidate. And you might remember back then the election wasn't decided that night in 2000. And it wasn't till after the election when I decided to throw my name in the hat for the job. And then I had the opportunity to actually walk up to the president-elect. It was perfect timing, and ask him for the job. And it all happened very quickly.
And obviously he liked you.
He did. Yeah, luckily.
Well, and so you got to capture, I mean, some of the biggest moments of his presidency, some of the biggest moments in the nation. I'm sure that when people come up to you and talk to you about some of the pictures that you were able to take, some of the moments you were able to capture for history, the first thing that probably pops into their mind is September 11th, right?
Oh, yeah, that day definitely was the most memorable day during the 8 years of my tenure there. So how did... From your perspective, because we've heard about, and I don't want to get too much into what you're going to talk about on Monday, June 24th, but how did that day unfold for you? Because we've heard from the president, we've heard from others who were involved in that day. You were the guy taking the pictures of that day and of history unfolding. We never see you because you're behind the camera. Well, the camera and the job itself really helped me focus on. Really, because it was such an emotional day for everyone. Everyone remembers where they were that day. Everyone remembers the horror and the horrific scenes on TV. And I was in shock the entire day, but I had a job to do. I had something to focus on. I had a camera, and that really helped me get through that day to follow the president, but also watching the president take us through that time period as well. I mean, he was very, very courageous, and he was a true leader during that entire time.
Were there times on that day, or just whenever, did the president forget that you were ever there? Because I mean, you were with him all the time. Does the president and his people, do they ever forget about that you're there, taking those moments, capturing those moments in history?
I don't think they really forget. I think there's a certain comfort level they have with my presence, which they really respected my role as the White House photographer. And, people call it, I was a fly on the wall, but I was more like a piece of furniture in the room. And if I wasn't there, they made sure I was there to make sure that I was there to capture history. And, there are times like on 9/11 where it was so intense and everyone was so focused on what they're doing. Yes, I did blend into the background, and they did forget about me. But in the back of their minds, they also knew I was there to capture history. So it was really a kind of an interesting way to experience history, behind the camera and being the trained observer during those times. Yeah,
absolutely. What were some of your favorite moments with the president, or even with his family?
For me, time on the ranch in Crawford, Texas.
Yeah.
I love being on the ranch and hanging out with the president and documenting him as a Texan. And he was obviously relaxed and was able to wind down and really, you can see his true self, which I really enjoyed. But he also had business there also. I mean, he would invite world leaders there. So I always enjoyed the time on the ranch. I enjoyed time with his family. I loved his parents. I enjoyed spending time with President 41, as we call him. In Kennebunkport, Maine, for example. Those times I remember the most with the family, especially Christmas time. I spent 8 Christmases with the Bush family at Camp David. Every year the clan would gather, and that's what I enjoyed the most.
Yeah, visiting with Eric Draper here on the Chad Hasty Show. The event inside the Oval Office, an intimate evening with President George W. Bush's White House photographer. You were the 11th White House photographer, is that correct, or chief photographer for the president?
Yeah, I haven't really counted. Yeah, I think that's true.
And so, what else? As the president's chief photographer, what else did you do during your time at I guess with the president and as the official photographer?
Well, my primary role is to develop a visual archive for history for the Presidential Library, and in doing that, for example, during the 8 years, I converted the White House photo operation from film to digital. Something that had to be done because the White House was behind the times, and that's the key job is to be able to hand over the archive to the National Archives for the Presidential Library.
And so, I mean, that must have that transition must have been quite an undertaking.
It was, with all the work had to be done just for covering the president, and then on top of it, design a workflow. Because back then we're talking 15 years ago, which we bought a cutting edge system, but yet even today it's still being used in the White House. So it was a lot of work to do. Yeah,
and before I let you go, Eric, and I if depending on how you answer this, you may or may not be able to talk about much about it. But were there ever moments where they said, okay, we don't want any cameras in here. We don't want anything. Or were you always with the president?
I was always with the president.
Wow.
There are times when there are top level security meetings, which I had top secret clearance, but I didn't have the top level in order to hear national threats to the country.
Sure.
Stuff like that. Those types of meetings. But I was in on 99% of what was happening in front of the president. But I always found the right opportunity to take the pictures, and I always found the right opportunity to kind of hover, but to be there but not be there as an effect. So it was really kind of an interesting dance I had to do for 8 years.
Yeah, wow. I mean, so much history that you were able to photograph and to just remember. I mean, just absolutely amazing. Eric, what are you doing these days?
Today, I'm based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm primarily a corporate photographer. I do corporate events for companies around the country and around the world. I still do some sporting events, and every political cycle, I kind of jump in and still have my toes in that. So it's a mixed bag, and I enjoy it.
So now, I know the president's a painter now. Has the president ever reached out to you about getting one of your photographs and trying to paint one of those?
Well, actually, he has. A lot of his work, he had an exhibit of portraits of leaders that he had relationships during his 8 years as president. And a lot of those portraits are based off of my photographs.
Wow.
My White House photographs during those years. So I really enjoyed seeing that and seeing his portrayal of those photographs.
That's got to be very cool.
Yeah, it was very cool.
That's got to be very cool. You get to hear a lot more from Eric Draper coming up on Monday, June 24th. Eric, thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate your time, and we'll give out all the details where people can hear from you. And I think it's going to be a great event coming up on Monday, the 24th.
Thank you, Chad. I'm really looking forward to it.
Have a good one, Eric.
Okay, thank you. You too.
That's Eric Draper. And this event, it's inside the Oval Office, an intimate evening with President George W. Bush's White House photographer. I bet he's got a ton of great stories. Just besides the one, obviously you go back to 9/11 and think about that. And I had a hunch that his, I guess second, maybe, most memorable moment would have been on the ranch. Because one of the iconic photos that he took of George W. Bush, and Jody, this is when they were in the truck and George W. Bush had on the white cowboy hat, and he's kind of, turned just a little bit towards whoever he was talking to. And that's an iconic photo of George W. Bush. Now, this is being put on by the West Texas Photographers, which Jody is a member of that group, and it's benefiting the Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep charity, which is a nationwide group of professional photographers who create professional portraits of parents and their infant who is expected to or has passed away before, during, or just after birth. This is coming up on Monday, June 24th at the Merced Alumni Center from 6 to 9 p.m. Coffee, dessert, cash bar, and a silent auction as well of 3 of Draper's photographs, including one signed by the president himself. You can get more information at westtexasphotographers.com. Chad Hasty Show, KFYO.